conditions that made a difference in my interpretation of the text. And it's based on the biblical principle that we human beings will never know everything. But this biblical testing method is a tool whereby we can get step by step closer to the truth that God has, and step by step develop a more detailed and comprehensive picture of the phenomena that we're examining, whether it be biblical texts or the record of nature. And that's one of the things I point out here in the chapter. You go to a research seminary, they're using the same method, testing method, as what you see in scientific research labs.
So you're saying the scientific method is the biblical method, and these 7 steps that are to be repeated have been derived in some fashion, not necessarily taken out of a Bible verse, but as people studied the pages of Scripture, they've determined these are the ways to discover truth?
It is. I mean, as you look at passages of the Bible where it goes through a sequence of physical events, and particularly where it's talking about creation, you do see those 7 steps are there. And also you see exhortations through the Bible that we're to avoid making too rapid of a commitment to an interpretation. From a biblical perspective, God understands that we humans are sinful, and we tend to jump to conclusions. And when we do, we tend to invest a lot of emotion there. And basically the Bible is exhorting us, you need to slow down. So the biblical testing method is really designed to slow down the researcher so that they don't latch on to a wrong conclusion too quickly, then hold on to it dogmatically. The biblical testing method is really an assault against dogmatism. And I find that amusing because when I talk to my atheist science peers, one of their big complaints is how dogmatic we Christians are. Yet the Bible, throughout the whole book, is exhorting us to avoid dogmatism in terms of developing these interpretations too quickly.
So you're saying the Bible invites testing, even of itself.
And invites adjustment. And so the idea that we can come up with a complete understanding of anything, theological or scientific, is an anti-biblical concept.
Hugh, can you give an example of the application of this method that has led to a successful advance or some kind of resolution in these creation
I give an
evolution?
example in the chapter because one of the problems I see in creation evolution debates is the debate seems too often to immediately go to the most complicated part of the debate where we have the least understanding and the least data. And that's typically the biological realm, where we talk about human origins, or we talk about, advanced animal life. And so the example I give in the chapter is, and it's a principle we lay out in the chapter 5, is that you want to always interpret the complex in the light of the simple. And you want to interpret that part where you got the poorest comprehensive database with that where you got the most complete comprehensive database. And so the success story I tell is one of astronomy and cosmology. And the advantage of astronomy and cosmology is we're looking at very simple systems. Stars, for example, are gas from the surface down to the core. And so we can use these straightforward gas laws and straightforward thermodynamic equations to predict the behavior of stars past, present, and future. We can check it out with observations and see that our theory is a remarkable fit with the observation, so it tells us we're on the right track. And it's also a realm where the astronomers typically have been quite forthright in exposing their philosophical biases and their religious biases. And so people can take that into account in evaluating the research that people are doing. And I basically tell a story of how at the beginning of the 20th century, the astronomical community had this idea that the universe was infinitely old, where you really don't need God's intervention to explain what's taking place in the history of astronomy, and how by the end of the 20th century that had been completely overturned, where we now accept the fact that the universe has a beginning. It's been around for finite time, and as we look at the features of the universe, we can see that it's extraordinarily fine-tuned to such a high degree that it forces a conclusion that there's a supernatural, super-intelligent designer that's responsible for all of this. Now, a lot of people don't like these conclusions because it's theologically against their beliefs. Nevertheless, because they're dealing with a subject matter that is so simple and so comprehensive, and I could add one more thing. The advantage of astronomy is you got a direct window to the past. In the other sciences, you're inferring the past, which opens up debate. People can make different inferences. But in astronomy, we directly witness the past. Now, of course, the weakness of astronomy is we have no knowledge of the present. We only have knowledge of the past.
Gee, you're a lot of help. Yeah. So in this case...
That's because of the velocity of light. It takes light time to travel from the sources to our telescope.
Yeah.
But because we have that direct measurement of what took place in the past, in fact, we can actually see the creation event, the cosmic. So we can actually observe the universe being created. And therefore, it really takes away the debate that people might have, because you say, well, if you don't believe what I'm saying, look through the telescope and you can see for yourself.
Yeah. I get you kind of answered my question there in looking at the 20th century and this transformation from one belief about the universe being eternal to now that it had a beginning about 14 billion years ago. That came about through testing, and modern instruments, I suppose, were part of that testing. So are you saying we can apply that same type of testing in these other realms, and that would lead to resolution?
Yes, in this sense, the story I give in this chapter is a place where I show you all the ways that the beliefs that astronomers had could be put to the test. So in astronomy, we have a lot of testing tools. But I'm also suggesting as we go into other scientific disciplines, with the advance of technology and with people being willing to integrate with the other sciences, likewise we can develop similarly powerful tests that will show which creation evolution model is right and which ones are wrong. So we can use this as an example to make progress in other scientific disciplines, recognizing that a lot of what we want to explore is still hidden from view because we lack the technology. But that might help us to develop the technology we need.
All right. Fair enough. What are you going to cover in the next chapter, Hugh?
Well, in the next chapter, we're going to kind of lay out the foundations for reasons to believe creation model and kind of look at the resources. Where are we getting our database from to develop the model? That's really step one of building any model, is saying, okay, what data do we have that needs to be explained? A model is trying to offer an explanation. Well, what are you explaining in the first place? So what we do in Chapter 5 is actually look at that database.
We'll hear about it next time. Thanks for listening to this episode. Well, Hugh, I think you mentioned last time that you're going to talk about how you started to build the creation model. So let's talk about it. This is a biblical model. So how did you build this foundation?
Well, it is a biblical creation model. So a place you want to begin is the Bible. And what we did, I did this many years ago, read through the entire Bible and picked up every passage in the Bible that dealt with the subject of creation or evolution or the history of life on planet Earth. Came up with about 1,500 different passages of Scripture.
You didn't do that over a couple of nights, did you? I trust.
It was about a 2.5-month project.
Only 2.5 months, okay.
So that's kind of my style in reading through the Bible, is I try to get through it in 2 or 3 months, but I focus on one topic. Then I have a notepad where I simply record all the passages that I find there. But in doing so, I found there were about 25 chapter length or longer creation accounts in the Bible. And accompanying that were many passages that were like 1, 2, 3, or 4 verses long only.
Now, Hugh, that might come as a surprise to many Bible readers. That many chapter-length accounts, and then did you say 1,500 verses up to that many?
Yes.
On creation.
On creation.
Wow, okay.
So there's a lot of content, and it kind of fits in what we talked about in our last podcast about putting things to the test. Now, with these 25 creation